There was a time when Nicolas Cage could buy anything he wanted, and he often did. Mansions, islands, castles, exotic cars, even a dinosaur skull worth more than most homes. For a man once commanding $20 million a film, excess felt like destiny. But behind the lavish purchases and tabloid headlines was something far more tragic. A man trying to hold on to himself as fame, fortune, and failure collided in spectacular fashion. Cage's story isn't a simple tale of reckless spending. It's about obsession, the kind that drives artists to greatness and destruction alike. He was never a conventional star. He was an experiment in chaos, the kind of actor who would sell out theaters one year and star in straight-to-DVD thrillers the next. The same intensity that fueled his brilliance on screen also bled into his personal life, where impulse replaced logic and passion replaced prudence. By the late 2000s, the empire had crumbled. The man who once owned castles in England and Germany now faced tens of millions in unpaid taxes, foreclosed homes, and public humiliation. But through it all, Cage refused to disappear. Instead of quitting, he reinvented himself, taking small, strange, fearless roles that reminded the world why he mattered. This isn't the story of a celebrity who lost his way. It's the story of an artist who risked everything to live exactly as he pleased and paid the price for it. Before Nicolas Cage became a financial cautionary tale, he was the embodiment of creative freedom. Born Nicholas Kim Coppola in 1964, he grew up surrounded by cinematic royalty. His uncle, Francis Ford Coppola, had already directed The Godfather. But Nicholas didn't want to ride anyone's coattails. He changed his name to Cage, inspired by Marvel's Luke Cage, to carve his own path. His early work in Raising Arizona, Moonstruck, and Wild at Heart revealed a rare combination of vulnerability and chaos. By the mid-1990s, he was one of the highest-paid actors in the world, earning $20 million per film. Yet while others saved or diversified, Cage lived as though success would last forever. Private islands, castles in Europe, rare dinosaur skulls, and luxury cars became extensions of his persona. For a while, the lifestyle matched his momentum. He was everywhere, winning an Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas and headlining blockbusters like Con Air and Face Off. Hollywood couldn't look away, but fame, like fortune, is fleeting. What began as eccentric indulgence would soon turn into excess without control. And when the golden years of action hits ended, the bills didn't. Behind the flamboyant purchases was a man chasing passion, not vanity. Cage later admitted that many investments came from emotion, not logic. He simply loved things too much. But in Hollywood, passion without boundaries can become a very expensive addiction. By the early 2000s, Nicolas Cage had reached a level of wealth few actors ever touch. At one point, his net worth was estimated at nearly $150 million. Yet his fortune didn't sit quietly in a bank account. It became a living extension of his imagination. Cage wasn't content with luxury. He wanted legend. He collected European castles, a Bahamian island, a fleet of vintage cars, rare art, and even a dinosaur skull that cost $276,000. He owned 15 homes, including a haunted mansion in New Orleans, once belonging to a notorious socialite accused of dark crimes. To Cage, these weren't trophies, they were symbols of adventure. Each purchase told a story, and that's what drove him. He saw himself as a custodian of eccentric history, not a celebrity hoarding wealth. But his purchases were impulsive, emotional, and often ill-advised. He'd buy properties faster than he could maintain them, often ignoring the practicalities of upkeep and taxes. When the housing market crashed in 2008, so did his empire. Properties that had once seemed like timeless treasures became financial burdens. The IRS soon followed, claiming he owed more than $14 million in back taxes. Suddenly, the man who once lived like a king found himself selling assets at a staggering pace just to stay afloat. Yet even in ruin, Cage never showed resentment. He called his spending a quest for experience. He admitted to mistakes but refused to call them regrets. "I just wanted to live creatively," he said. It was honesty without apology, the confession of a man who valued the story more than the ending. For all his creative brilliance, Nicolas Cage was never a businessman. He relied heavily on financial advisors, entrusting them with vast sums of money while he focused on his art. That trust proved disastrous. In 2009, Cage sued his longtime business manager, Samuel Levin, accusing him of negligence and fraud. He claimed Levin had failed to pay taxes on time, mismanaged assets, and encouraged reckless spending. Levin fired back, alleging that Cage had ignored all warnings and spent uncontrollably. Somewhere between those two narratives lay the truth: an artist too consumed by passion to notice the storm building around him, and a manager too passive to stop it. By the time the lawsuits ended, Cage was financially crippled and emotionally drained. His properties were seized or auctioned off one by one, the castles, the mansions, the island gone. He sold rare cars, comic books, and memorabilia worth millions. Yet, despite the chaos, Cage never declared bankruptcy. Instead, he began what would become one of the most surprising comebacks in modern Hollywood. He worked tirelessly. He accepted roles in low-budget and independent films, sometimes shooting multiple projects in a single year. Critics mocked his output, but behind that frenzy was necessity. Each movie helped chip away at his massive debts. "I was in a hole, and the only way out was work," he later said. "It wasn't pride, it was perseverance." The loss of fortune revealed something deeper about Cage: resilience. He refused to disappear into bitterness. Instead, he confronted his downfall the same way he approached every role, with intensity, vulnerability, and defiance. Once a fixture of summer blockbusters, Nicolas Cage suddenly found himself in a very different part of Hollywood. Gone were the big studio contracts and red carpet premieres. In their place came straight-to DVD thrillers, bizarre horror films, and indie projects shot on shoestring budgets. For many, it looked like desperation. But for Cage, it was survival and, oddly, artistic rebirth. To pay off his debts, he began accepting nearly every script offered to him. Between 2011 and 2018, he appeared in more than 30 films, a pace unheard of for an Oscar winner. Some critics ridiculed the choices, calling them random or embarrassing. Yet beneath the chaos was a quiet brilliance. Even in the most obscure projects, Cage gave everything. His performances, no matter how strange the setting, carried the same commitment he once brought to Leaving Las Vegas, and the gamble worked. Slowly, his debts shrank. Audiences began to rediscover him not as the eccentric millionaire, but as the relentless craftsman. Films like Joe, Mandy, and Pig reminded the world of his depth. Cage never begged for redemption. He earned it through persistence. What outsiders saw as a fall from grace was, in reality, a return to authenticity. He no longer chased fame or fortune, he chased truth. The Nicolas Cage, who once bought castles, was now performing in dusty indie studios, and somehow he seemed freer there than he ever had in wealth. In Hollywood, reputation is currency, and for a while, Nicolas Cage's name meant box office gold. But when his finances collapsed and he began accepting every role offered, that reputation shifted overnight. The media mocked his choices, critics dismissed his projects, and the same industry that once celebrated his unpredictability now labeled him washed up. Every new film was treated like evidence of desperation rather than dedication. Yet, what most didn't see was the quiet determination behind those decisions. Cage wasn't just trying to pay bills, he was rebuilding credibility, one movie at a time. "I never stopped loving acting," he said. "It's my oxygen." To him, each role, no matter how obscure, was a way to reconnect with the craft that had once defined his life. He began working in smaller markets: Bulgaria, Romania, Thailand, anywhere that offered a paycheck and a challenge. Crew members often recalled how humble he was: no entourage, no ego, just pure focus. He'd rehearse lines alone, take direction patiently, and treat even micro-budget films like passion projects. This commitment gradually changed the narrative. Film enthusiasts started revisiting his performances, recognizing flashes of brilliance even in otherwise forgettable titles. Online, Nicolas Cage cult appreciation communities formed, celebrating his willingness to take creative risks in a formulaic industry. In many ways, the very thing that once made him an outsider, his refusal to conform, became his salvation. Reputation, for Cage, wasn't about prestige anymore. It was about perseverance. The world had laughed at his downfall, but through sheer tenacity, he turned ridicule into resilience. To understand Nicolas Cage's financial and emotional roller coaster, you have to understand the man behind the myth. Cage has always been larger than life, a performer whose intensity spills off the screen into his real existence. He's described his acting style as nouveau shamanic, a process that channels emotion like spiritual energy. That same intensity governed how he lived, spontaneously, passionately, and often recklessly. Friends say he feels everything in extremes. When he loves fully. When he buys completely. He once admitted that he doesn't see possessions as things, but as experiences, symbols of his imagination. That philosophy fueled his creativity, but it also destroyed his finances. He wasn't buying wealth, he was chasing wonder. Cage's relationships reflected the same turbulence, short, intense, and often overshadowed by career demands. Yet those who know him best describe him as deeply kind and self-aware, never arrogant or detached. In interviews, he speaks about mistakes without bitterness, often laughing at himself. "I've been up, I've been down, but I'm still here," he said. And that's something. This blend of humility and eccentricity makes him unlike any other Hollywood figure. He's both myth and man, a performer who embodies the chaos he portrays. And perhaps that's why audiences never fully let go of him. Behind the extravagance and missteps lies a person who dares to live honestly, even when it costs him everything. While extravagant purchases contributed to his downfall, it was the IRS that delivered the final blow. In 2009, the government hit Nicolas Cage with a bill for more than $14 million in unpaid taxes. Years of financial mismanagement, combined with failed investments and miscommunication with his advisors, had left his accounts in disarray. For most stars, such a debt would have ended careers, but Cage faced it head-on. He sold nearly every luxury asset he owned, his New Orleans mansions, his Rhode Island estate, his Bavarian castle, his Bel Air home, even the dinosaur skull, which, in a twist, he returned to Mongolia after learning it was stolen. Every sale chipped away at the mountain of debt, and every new film contract pushed him a little closer to freedom. It wasn't glamorous. He took roles that paid quickly, often in obscure thrillers shot overseas. Fans wondered why an Oscar winner was doing straight-to-video releases, but for Cage, it wasn't about pride, it was about survival. "Work was my redemption," he said years later. "I owed money, so I worked. That's what you do." By 2017, he had repaid nearly all his debts. It was a staggering turnaround, one built not on lawyers or loopholes, but sheer persistence. Through humility, sacrifice, and relentless effort, Nicolas Cage reclaimed control of his life and his finances. When the financial collapse hit, Nicolas Cage found himself doing what few could imagine, liquidating a life that once symbolized success itself. The process was humiliating and heartbreaking. Auction listings appeared for his mansions, his island, his artwork, his fleet of cars. Every possession told a story, and every sale felt like erasing a chapter of his identity. The Bel Air mansion went first, its ornate halls once filled with Renaissance art and marble sculptures. Then the two European castles followed, including his medieval Bavarian fortress with secret passageways and towers. Even his prized comic book collection, which included the first appearance of Superman, was sold for millions. Yet for Cage, the hardest part wasn't the loss of wealth, it was the public spectacle of it. The tabloids framed it as greed meeting karma. But those who knew him saw something different, a man facing consequences head-on, refusing to hide. He handled the losses with surprising grace. "You can't take it with you," he told reporters, "so I might as well start letting go." There was no bitterness in his tone, just exhaustion, the quiet acceptance that comes when material dreams collapse. In a strange way, the dismantling of his empire became a purification. He'd chased life's extremes and finally found peace in surrender. Selling everything wasn't defeat, it was survival. And in losing the trappings of success, Nicolas Cage discovered a kind of freedom he hadn't felt in decades. For the first time, there were no castles to maintain, no image to uphold, just the man, the work, and the will to start again. By the mid-2000s, Cage's fortunes began to shift again, this time not in wealth, but in purpose. Having paid down most of his debts, he began choosing roles that spoke to him rather than those that simply paid the bills. The result was an unexpected renaissance. Indie films like Joe, Mandy, and Pig reminded audiences of the actor's depth, sensitivity, and raw instinct. Critics who once dismissed him began calling these performances career-defining and soulful. But the comeback didn't happen overnight. It came through discipline and humility. Cage stopped chasing spectacle and embraced simplicity. He moved out of sprawling estates and into modest homes. He cut expenses, built healthier routines, and reconnected with his son and close friends. Those who worked with him during this period spoke of a man transformed, still eccentric, still intense, but centered. His work ethic never wavered. He approached every film, big or small, with the same intensity as his Oscar-winning days. On independent sets, he arrived early, collaborated closely with directors, and often refused special treatment. "I just want to work," he said. "It keeps me honest." That humility resonated with a new generation of filmmakers who saw him not as a fallen star, but as a fearless artist who had lived every lesson the industry could teach. By rebuilding quietly, Nicolas Cage achieved something most stars never do: authentic rebirth. His fame no longer depended on extravagance, but endurance. He became proof that failure, when faced with integrity, can evolve into legacy. When Pig premiered in 2021, it felt like Hollywood itself exhaled. Critics called it a masterclass in restraint, praising Cage's quiet, aching portrayal of a reclusive chef searching for his stolen truffle pig. For once, headlines weren't about his finances, they were about his artistry. The man who had been ridiculed for excess was suddenly being hailed as one of the most disciplined performers of his generation. What made Pig special wasn't just the film, it was what it symbolized. It marked Cage's evolution from chaos to clarity, from survival to serenity. There was no overacting, no spectacle, no eccentric flair, just truth. After years of relentless noise, he had rediscovered silence, and audiences listened. Awards buzz followed, but Cage handled it with characteristic humility. He didn't celebrate victory, he reflected on endurance. "Everything that went wrong brought me here," he said in an interview, "and here is good." That statement summed up his entire journey, an admission that sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. With Pig, he wasn't chasing redemption, he was proving he never needed it. The industry that had once mocked him now stood applauding, realizing that the man they'd written off had quietly reclaimed his throne, not through fame or fortune, but through truth. As the years passed, Nicolas Cage's spending habits became legend stories of dinosaur bones. Haunted mansions and rare artifacts filled the internet. Some were exaggerated, others completely true, yet behind the headlines was a deeper truth. Cage's excess wasn't greed, it was curiosity. He wasn't collecting for status, he was chasing meaning. Every bizarre purchase reflected his imagination, his hunger for experiences that made life feel cinematic. He once said, "I'm a seeker, I look for magic in the world." That search guided both his performances and his purchases. To him, owning a castle wasn't indulgence, it was poetry. But what the public saw as eccentricity, accountants saw as chaos. Maintaining multiple estates across continents came with millions in upkeep. Taxes, mortgages, and staff salaries mounted faster than new scripts could arrive. The financial engine couldn't sustain the artistic fantasy. Hollywood mocked his choices, but many quietly admired his audacity. In an industry obsessed with image, Cage lived authentically, even when it cost him everything. He didn't buy things to flaunt them. He bought them because they made him feel. Yet, that same emotional instinct that fueled his performances also clouded his judgment. Over time, his myth overtook his humanity. The tabloids painted him as a caricature, a cautionary tale of fame without restraint. But in truth, Nicolas Cage was never a villain of excess. He was a man who loved life too deeply, who turned every success into an experiment in freedom. When his fortune vanished, so did the myth. What remained was something far more enduring, a reminder that art, like life, is messy, flawed, and heartbreakingly human. Nicolas Cage's downfall became more than a financial story, it became a moral one. For years, his mistakes were discussed like warnings. Don't overspend, don't trust the wrong people, don't chase extravagance. But those lessons, while practical, missed the essence of what his journey revealed. Cage's collapse wasn't about money, it was about excess of emotion, the danger of mistaking passion for permanence. He once admitted, "I was trying to live life like a movie." That confession encapsulates everything: the thrill, the chaos, the consequences. His life mirrored his performances, fearless, unfiltered, and vulnerable to collapse. When the curtain fell, he didn't run from his failures, he dissected them. He spoke openly about the price of impulse and the need for balance. You can hear wisdom in his later interviews, humility in place of bravado. He no longer speaks of castles or cars, but of art, gratitude, and redemption. I had to lose material things to gain perspective, he reflected. Now I have what matters: family, work, and peace. Cage's fall is Hollywood's reminder that failure isn't fatal, it's formative. The industry that once exploited his extravagance now reveres his resilience. His journey redefines success. It's not about maintaining perfection, but surviving imperfection with dignity. Through that lens, Nicolas Cage's story stops being tragic and becomes transcendent, a portrait of a man who fell spectacularly, learned painfully, and rose quietly, wiser for it. Today, Nicolas Cage stands as something few actors ever become, a symbol of reinvention. After losing his fortune, reputation, and privacy, he emerged not bitter, but liberated. He's no longer the megastar chasing blockbusters or fortune. He's an artist returning to his roots. His recent performances carry the weight of a man who has lived every emotion he portrays. In interviews, he speaks with calm reflection, crediting his hardships for grounding him. "I used to think success was about more," he said. "Now I know it's about less." That shift defines the new Nicolas Cage. His films, stripped of spectacle, rich in soul, mirror his evolution. Each performance feels like an act of gratitude, a love letter to the craft that saved him. The world now sees him differently, not as a fallen star, but as a survivor of his own legend. He's found harmony in imperfection, purpose in simplicity. He's living proof that you can lose everything and still remain whole. Cage once said he'd rather be misunderstood than ordinary. Ironically, through his struggles, the world finally understood him. He was never extravagant for show, he was extravagant for feeling. And now, having lived both the dream and the downfall, he's achieved what every artist seeks: truth. In an industry that thrives on spectacle, few stories reveal Hollywood's contradictions as powerfully as Nicolas Cage's. For years, the entertainment world idolized him for his bold choices and unpredictable magnetism. Yet when the money ran out, those same headlines that once praised his audacity turned venomous. Reporters called him reckless, critics called him a warning, and studio executives whispered that he was finished. Hollywood loves to celebrate risk until it fails. Cage became the scapegoat for its own excesses. He was far from the first actor to overspend or mismanage wealth, but his downfall made for irresistible headlines because it mirrored the town's own addiction to extremes. The irony was painful: an artist punished for living by the same creative impulse that made him great. While others hid behind PR teams, Cage faced the chaos publicly. He gave interviews, admitted mistakes, and spoke honestly about regret and renewal. "The money's gone," he said bluntly, "but the work is still there. I'm still here." Behind that humility was a quiet defiance. Hollywood wanted a tragedy. He chose transformation. The man who once defined cinematic excess became the face of artistic endurance. Younger actors began citing him as inspiration not for his extravagance, but for his willingness to rebuild from ashes. His journey exposed the hypocrisy of an industry that rewards excess until it becomes inconvenient. By confronting his collapse head-on, Cage gave Hollywood something rare: honesty. In doing so, he turned scandal into reflection. His story reminds both artists and audiences that fame isn't protection, it's pressure. And when that pressure cracks, the measure of greatness isn't how high you've climbed, but how you rise once you've fallen. Most stars fade quietly when fortune turns. Nicolas Cage did the opposite. Instead of retreating into nostalgia or bitterness, he kept working relentlessly, unapologetically, and without shame. The sheer volume of his output became a punchline, but within it lay something profound: perseverance. Every new film, from the bizarre to the beautiful, was a declaration that he still believed in the craft that once saved him. Cage's resilience became his redemption. He no longer chased fame, only fulfillment. Directors marveled at his discipline. He memorized entire scripts, studied each role like it was his first, and treated low-budget sets with the reverence of major studios. To him, acting wasn't about the paycheck. It was therapy, purpose, and identity. His intensity, once misunderstood as instability, was now recognized as passion refined by pain. Away from the spotlight, he simplified everything. He sold the castles and cars, traded noise for peace, and focused on family and art. He began mentoring young actors and supporting independent cinema, the kind of projects that had once given him freedom before the weight of fame distorted it. His performances grew deeper, quieter, and more human. The world finally saw what had been there all along, a man incapable of indifference. Today, Nicolas Cage stands not as a fallen icon but as proof that ruin need not be permanent. He turned loss into wisdom and ridicule into respect. The fortune he rebuilt wasn't measured in dollars, it was measured in dignity. Hollywood had written his final chapter. He chose to keep writing. Nicolas Cage's journey is more than a Hollywood saga. It's a study of body, resilience, artistry, and the fragile balance between passion and self-destruction. He soared higher than most, fell harder than anyone expected, and somehow climbed back without bitterness. In losing his fortune, he gained something far rarer: authenticity. His life reminds us that failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of it. The castles, the debts, the eccentric headlines, those were chapters, not conclusions. What endures is the artist who never stopped searching for meaning, even when it cost him everything. So when you watch Nicolas Cage today, whether in a small indie gem or a blockbuster resurrection, remember that you're not seeing a comeback. You're witnessing survival in its purest form. If his story moved you, don't just watch, reflect. Share it, comment, and subscribe for more untold truths behind the stars who dared to live loudly, love fiercely, and rise again when the world counted them out.